Well, I decided to run for a variety of reasons. I know that probably the most important question that people want to know is, you're challenging an incumbent. Why did you decide to do that? And it's not something a decision that I took lightly. I decided to run for this seat because I thought that I could most effectively represent the district. It's an enormous district that is composed of a diverse group of interests, and I thought that my background and life experiences would uniquely equip me to be able to represent the district effectively. I would categorize myself as a constitutional conservative, and so the starting point for any policy decisions that I would make focus first and foremost on what does the Constitution say about it, and is it the role of the federal government to be legislating there in the first place? And I think that those sets of values actually equip me well to be able to appeal to the Republican electorate, because it's a starting point and a framework where people can have a debate. So I would be somebody who supports civil liberties, First Amendment, Second Amendment, Fourth Amendment right to privacy. I think that the government has been overreaching, specifically with the NSA and some of its surveillance. And so that has been something that has been particularly appealing to libertarians and others who are concerned about things like that. But I know that in a general election, this is a swing district, and the electorate's going to be looking for someone who is not just a conservative, but someone whose life experiences equip them to be able to speak to a diverse group of people. And I think my background is varied, as you saw from the piece. I think that there were a lot of things that make me a non-traditional Republican. Specifically, some of the issues that I would be focusing on in the general election, I would be interested in some criminal justice reform measures. For the past several years, I've served on the board of directors of a group called Prison Fellowship. It's the world's largest outreach to inmates and their families. And I've actually gone into maximum security prisons, met with inmates, and understand the toll that some of our nation's policies, criminal justice policies, take, not just on inmates, but on their families. And when the party's talking about what it means to be pro-family, I think revisiting some of the mandatory minimums for nonviolent offenses is something that's incredibly important, because oftentimes you have a judge who has no discretion with sentencing, and if you have a mother who has a drug offense, to me it doesn't make sense to just leap automatically to incarceration when the consequence will be that her children have to go into foster care. My mother has worked in the foster care system before, and I know firsthand from her experiences what that toll is like for young people. And so I would hope to be able to bring to the district not just conservative principles, but something that is offering some ideas and issues that might be compelling to people who want to see other things beyond just constitutional conservative principles.
That prison group was the Charles Colson when he started, is that right?
Yes.
And when you're talking about drugs, the president recently talked about marijuana and how he thinks it's not any worse than alcohol or something to that effect. Is one of what the states are doing and what the federal government is doing with marijuana, do you have a position on that? Should that be decriminalized in some way nationwide?
I would not support legalizing drugs, or including marijuana, because from the work that I've had in terms of working with young people, I do think sending the message that drugs are illegal and drugs can have negative consequences is something, it's an appropriate thing for the government to do. But what I would like to see is that we don't just move right to incarceration. And so legality is one issue, but then what are the consequences? That's the second issue. And the consequences is the aspect that I'm most interested in focusing on. That's all right.
How is your campaign going? How are you campaigning? How are your donations looking? What is happening with your campaign?
It has been, I think, a unique campaign from a lot of perspectives. At the beginning of the campaign, when I announced my candidacy back in June, fundraising went very well for the first couple of weeks, because I think the political establishment was very surprised by my decision to enter this race, and so they did not coalesce in an effort to, I would say, prevent donors from making contributions. But then once that happened, there has been a concerted effort to dissuade people from contributing to my campaign, and to dissuade, and so what the consequence of that is there are a lot of people who do not want to contribute because of fear of political retribution, or they only want to contribute up to that limit that requires federal disclosure. And so that's challenging. But one of the ways that I've been working to overcome that challenge, first of all, is developing a strong network of grassroots supporters throughout the district. And we have a fantastic group of volunteers and coordinators throughout the district who are working very hard to do everything from phone banking to distributing flyers to doing a lot of the groundwork that would ordinarily be done by a party apparatus. And then the other thing that I've been focusing on is engaging the national media, because one of the things that people use financial resources for is the opportunity to get media exposure and to be able to present yourself on TV. And so to the extent that I'm able to generate earned media, that's something that's helpful in terms of name ID and being able to drive home a message.
I guess that a continuing question, and I know you've heard all this before, but why should it be you instead of Rodney Davis?
First of all, I believe that I am more fiscally conservative than Mr. Davis. And that is something that I think is important when we have the type of national debt that we do. For example, I would have voted no on the last budget because I think it did very little to reduce spending, and it targeted the pensions of veterans. And so in a budget that was essentially a status quo budget, to both do nothing to substantively address our spending and our debt, but to target the only cuts to veterans is something that I thought was unconscionable, so I would have voted no.
Was that a cut in what they would have gotten, or was that an actual cut?
Well, over the course of a lifetime, it is a cut on the cost of living adjustment.
Okay.
And so, but regardless of how it's projected out, the consequence will be that they will ultimately receive less in terms of spending, or less in terms of their pensions. Mm-hmm. And I think it sends the wrong message, because one of the rationales that I heard for making that cut was, well, these are people who can go get a second job after they have served their time in the military. And what that struck me as is not having a real appreciation for the toll that serving actually takes. You have some members of the military who come home and deal with post-traumatic stress disorder. Their families have often moved from place to place, and so being able to just instantly go get a job, or the kind of job training that would make you competitive in the job market, it just struck me as callous and the wrong message at a time in which we have so many members of the enlisted military who have sacrificed time and time and time again.
So what would you have spent less on than what was in that budget?
I would have focused on the mandatory part of the budget. Right now, all the discussion in terms of our budget focuses on the discretionary spending, which is only 1/3 of the budget. And when we do that, then we're forced to make choices that I think are difficult, but don't ultimately get to the key drivers. So I would have wanted to talk about what we should be doing in terms of Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare, because that's 2/3 of the budget. It's the mandatory spending, and not having a conversation about those programs, I think, always put us in that 1/3 where we're not really addressing the long-term problems.
And how do you accomplish cuts in those? Because obviously they're touchy political issues anytime you try that third rail stuff.
Right. Well, there are some specific things that I would want to do in terms of Social Security solvency, and I know that political consultants tell you to avoid ever saying those things during the course of a campaign, but I think if someone doesn't have some specific things they would do, they shouldn't be running for office. So first of all, I think for people who are not close to retirement, I think the eligibility age should be raised. So if you're my age, I'm 33 years old, there's no reason why the age should not be raised for people my age, because we're in a position where we can make the kind of life adjustments needed to address that. For people, though, who are close to retirement, I think that would be unfair. The other thing that I would want to see added in terms of raising that eligibility age for younger people is I'd want to see a hardship exemption. When I was looking at a variety of proposals on what to do about Social Security, one of the things that I came across was the notion that for people who are working jobs that are physically taxing, saying to them, just work another year or another 2 years, is very different from saying to a lawyer, work another year, work another 2 years. And so I wouldn't want to do something that's regressive and that doesn't take into consideration those things.
So you're saying the age might not have to be raised for like laborers or something?
There'd be some sort of an exemption.
Okay.
So, and I don't know exactly the logistics of how someone would apply for that, but it would be important to me that there would be something in place where it would take into consideration the differences in the kinds of employment situations people had.
So individuals would apply under your idea, or would it be like whole classes of workers in different industries?
I would see it as being more individuals.
Okay.
The second thing that I would like to see with Social Security is an element of means testing. I would not want to see, there are some proposals I know where it's not having any sort of Social Security payment to people over a certain income level. I would not support that because I think it fundamentally changes the nature of what Social Security is, but I think some element of means testing is appropriate because the goal of those programs should be maintaining their solvency for people who most need it.
Would you have voted for the farm bill that just passed?
I would have first wanted to see if there were things I could have gotten done on what I consider to be some of the subsidies that are wasteful. And I can't say whether I would have voted for it or not at that point in time, because when they put out that bill, there was less than 48 hours given to members of the House to actually read it. And so people were not in a position to read it. And I think that ultimately, I'm happy that the Farm Bill passed. I think that farmers within this district deserve to have a farm bill that gives them the ability to predict and to plan. And right now, for the past 2 years, they've just been working on extensions. But there were some troubling things about the Farm Bill. For example, there was a definition of who qualifies as a farm manager and gets access to some of the subsidies. And both houses actually passed something that would cap that, and that was taken out of the final bill. I think that if we're going to make cuts, we have to make sure that they're equal across the board. But I'm committed to a strong crop insurance program, which I think is important, and farmers throughout the district are happy about that. But I think the process of, again, giving people a bill with less than 2 days to read what's in it, and you ultimately don't really know what you're voting for, I find that really troubling.
And the food stamp side, which was like, I guess, 8 billion cuts over 10 years, appropriate level there, or?
Well, the reforms, I'm focusing more on what are the reforms that they're focused on as opposed to the dollar amount. Because one of the things that I found frustrating about the way the debate occurred is people were saying, should we cut $80 billion, should we cut $40 billion, should we cut $8 billion? To me, that's the wrong question. It's, are there loopholes that would cause abuses, and are there certain loopholes we should close? To me, saying, should it be $40 billion or should it be $8 billion is completely arbitrary. The point of food stamp program is to make sure that those who are hungry have access to those benefits. It's not about $40 billion versus $8 billion. It seems to me that the types...
$40 billion costs $32 billion more, so it's a lot of money. But
it is a lot of money.
Are you satisfied, or have you been able to investigate if it has appropriate safeguards?
The loophole that it looks like they were trying to close was to ensure that states were not just being able to leverage someone's need for one type of aid into automatic qualification. To me, that does make sense, because it seems that there might be reasons why you need access to one program and not another. And I have not seen any reason why that creates unnecessary obstacles for people. But I think obviously $1 amount versus another dollar amount is real dollars. But the point of the program is to make sure that those in need have access to what they need.
As you go around the district, what are you hearing from people? What are they most concerned about, and how do you address them?
One of the common refrains is just overwhelming frustration with Congress, with the political process, and I think that's evident in a 7% approval rating. And people feel very disenfranchised and disconnected from their government. And so even though I'm not even in Congress at this point in time, and I'm outside of the political establishment, people will vent their concerns, and they'll acknowledge that they know that I have not contributed to the problem and that I'm not at this point in time in a position to actually address anything, but they said, you're as close as we get to somebody who maybe can listen. Because I do town halls throughout the district, and that participatory sort of government and part of the political process, I think, is missing. And so people talk about the fact they don't actually get the ability to have a conversation with the people who are representing them. They can receive mailers, they can watch them on TV, but when it comes time to asking them a question and getting a specific response, people feel really frustrated. So that's one thing that people are concerned about. People are also concerned about jobs. I think that's the number one thing that people are concerned about, but the reasons people are concerned probably vary throughout the district. In some parts of the district, there have been industries and large employers that have left, so the concern is, what do we do to replace it? Other parts of the district, there are infrastructure concerns, and whether those infrastructure challenges inhibit companies from wanting to move there. And then in other places, you have very high unemployment rates, and there's the concern about whether the young people who are graduating have the job skills needed to match the employment opportunities within the district.
And if you were going to solve the jobs problem, how would you do it if given a magic wand?
If I had a magic wand, well, there are a lot of things I would do. I would start with the debt if I had a magic wand. But first of all, I would stress that I don't think it's the role of the federal government to create jobs. I think that the role of the federal government is to create the kind of circumstances that are conducive to job creation and ensure that they don't do things that inhibit job creation from the private sector. That said, I think there are some things that the federal government can do in partnership with the state government and leveraging resources that already exist within communities. So I think job training is an area that a lot of focus should be, that there should be more attention paid. So community colleges, I think, are great resources for developing partnerships within the private sector to say, okay, what are the job vacancies that you have and that you think you'll have in the next 2 to 3 years? What are the skills that you think the ideal applicant would have? And what can we do to ensure that young people who graduate are able to fill those jobs? Because I think the unemployment rate is a deceptive number. For example, when I was in Decatur, I've spent a lot of time in Decatur talking to a lot of employers there. And Decatur has a very high unemployment rate. But there are also a lot of job vacancies, which is surprising. And a lot of vacancies that have been open for quite a significant period of time. And so it's not the case that there simply aren't jobs. It's that the young people who are graduating may not have the skills needed. So that's an area where I would focus.
I was actually toured the new workplace development center out at Lincoln Lake Community College
Okay.
with Rodney Davis.
Okay.
And I know, he's all excited about it, and everybody's all excited about it. We have a great community college system, everybody says. So what more can be done in this way? You want to throw more money at it to get more people in those programs?
I don't think throwing more money at it
Or
is...
give more money to it, invest more in it.
I don't know that that's the right next step, because we need to see whether those programs actually are going to generate good results. I think that it's easy to create a new opportunity or a new program, give it an attractive name, and then check it off the list and say we're done. But I think that's something that time will tell whether it actually does anything to generate the kind of jobs we need.
So where these vacancies occur, is it because they're highly technical jobs that require special credentialing or training, and people just are unwilling or unable to take those kinds of classes? Have the employers instructed you on what it would take to fill the gap?
Yes, I was fascinated when I found out about the number of vacancies, because I talked to so many people who don't have jobs, and so I wanted to know, well, what are the barriers or the limitations? And what the employer said, there are a host of issues. One issue they brought up were soft skills. So the types of things they would look for in terms of communication and presentation. And that probably varies from employer to employer what they mean, but soft skills is a phrase that I've heard from a lot of employers. And that's something that doesn't necessarily have to just be addressed at the community college level. I would think that high schools would be a great place to help young people start to cultivate those skills if necessary. They also talk about the misperception of what certain jobs require. So when people think about manufacturing or working in certain industries, they have antiquated ideas about what they'll be doing. They aren't thinking about the modern factories that we have that are largely computer driven. They're thinking of something from the 1930s. So perception is one reason why people may not apply. But then there are some highly technical skills as well. And that's why I think that the federal government is probably not the branch of government that's going to be most helpful in driving the kind of job skill development, because it's really going to be driven by the needs of a particular company in many respects.
Where should healthcare go? Are you a repeal person?
I am a repeal person, but I also am somebody who thinks that we need to offer some solutions to the very real problems that led the country to adopt a program in the first place. I will say that there are very few policies that have created the level of anger throughout the district as the Affordable Care Act. And the number of people who talk about having lost their insurance, having higher premiums, and also fear about what's going to happen when the employer mandate actually goes into effect. And that seems to cross ideological spectrum, because it's not just about people who want to deprive the president of a victory. It's people who went home and found out that they're now going to pay a premium that's 40% higher. And when you look at the way in which the Affordable Care Act is structured, it's this incredible labyrinth of mandates. And so if you're talking about just fixing things, I don't think you can fix one thing without fundamentally addressing some of the problems that are leading to these increases and people being dropped in the first place. And that's the reason why I would vote to repeal. I think that it's just such a massive labyrinth that if you're not going to kind of start from the beginning, I don't really know that much positive can happen from tinkering on the edges.
Especially going back to the system as we had, is that the solution, or what? Is there a step or two you would take from that point?
Well, there are definitely some steps, because there are two things that people talk about in terms of what they're afraid of with the old system. First of all, people are very concerned about pre-existing conditions. People are also concerned about not having access to coverage, especially for younger people. And since our health insurance is so highly tied to employment, you've got young people who are graduating, can't find jobs under the old system, would be in danger of being dropped from their parents' coverage. That's very real. The other thing that
So
I...
you're for the 26 and the pre-existing conditions?
Pardon?
You're for keeping it on your parents' insurance till you're 26 and for coverage of pre-existing conditions. Would those be things you would want to keep?
Well, I think those things could be addressed without having had the Affordable Care Act in the first place.
But those elements...
Those are elements I would want to see addressed.
Okay.
Those would definitely be among others. Mm-hmm. But I think there are ways we could have addressed some of the specific things that concerned people about the healthcare process without doing the Affordable Care Act. The other thing that I have found is, and this is something that concerns me greatly, is when I was at Harvard Law School, I did a study on bankruptcy, and seeing the number of bankruptcies that were caused by someone having some sort of catastrophic injury happen. And then you have the occurrence of both having a medical issue. If you cannot work, then you lose your insurance. And so when people think about the bankruptcy problem, oftentimes they're just thinking of people going out and buying 5 or 6 flat screen TVs. But the research that I did showed exactly the opposite. You had people who were working hard and trying to do something productive for their families, and you have a negative consequence, and it leads to economic calamity. So there are a variety of things I would like to see happen that I think could address some of those issues. First of all, I think the market for the catastrophic health insurance plan, I would like to see more of those options available to people. And I think the Affordable Care Act makes that very difficult. because it sets in place standards for what would be an appropriate level of coverage. Whereas the catastrophic insurance plan, I think, speaks more acutely to people who are worried about economic ruin.
Mhm.
Yes.
So you're saying people should be able to buy just a catastrophic plan if they don't want the whole, all that other stuff?
I believe so.
Okay.
It also speaks specifically to young people. I talk to a lot of young people throughout the district, and they plan to opt out of the plan, because it requires them to buy a plan that they cannot afford from their perspective, and it also requires a level of coverage that they don't feel really relates to their actual needs. They feel healthy, they feel good, but they also would, if they don't have any insurance plan at all, they're going to be in that situation where one unfortunate circumstance could lead them to the same sort of economic ruin. So I would like to see a greater market for that. I also would like people to be able to buy insurance plans across state lines, because the issue is the way the old system was set up, there was really nothing that an individual consumer could do to have any impact on the market itself. And as somebody who believes in the free market and choice, the fact that there was really nothing that the consumer could do created a scenario where you didn't have more options, you didn't have the ability to bring down price. So another proposal that I would like to, that I think holds great promise, would be having the tax treatment for employer-sponsored plans and individual plans be equalized. Because I think a disparity in tax treatment creates a disincentive for people to purchase individual plans. And I think when more people are able to purchase individual plans, it puts a consumer in a position to be able to exercise leverage that can influence the market.
Is it, by the way, realistic even to talk about repeal? I know this president's only in for a couple more years, but that people are getting used to this and buying plans. Is it even realistic at this point?
Well, I think time will tell whether it's realistic, but I think when you run for public office, you have to be willing to be committed to the ideals that you think would be best for the country and the district. Otherwise, there's no point in running.
So, I just read over the lunch hour that Speaker Boehner is calling a clean debt ceiling bill tomorrow.
Oh, is he?
Yeah.
What does that mean even?
No attachment.
No riders,
No,
yeah.
we're not gonna change the pension for veterans or any of that, because that wasn't drawing enough support. So what do you think about that?
I have real concerns about the way we approach the debt ceiling in the first place. To me, it makes no sense that the debt ceiling debate happens separate from the time in which the money is being authorized, because it creates almost this political theater about nothing. Because if you're concerned about continuing spending, which I am, the time to be deciding whether we're raising the debt ceiling is the time we're passing the budget and authorizing the money in the first place. And so to me, it just makes no sense, and I've not been able to hear any kind of good answer as to why we would be having this discussion now when back in December we did the budget and then in January we had the spending bill. Then to be saying, okay, should we now make good on the money that we already authorized, to me seems incoherent. And I would definitely, sent to Washington, D.C., I would be a strong voice for trying to link those together, because otherwise it's meaningless theater.
Okay. I mean, obviously, the White House argues you've got to pass this because we're just paying the debt on money we've already spent. Do you
Right,
agree
which
with
is
that?
which is why I think we need to have the debt ceiling debate happen at the time we're deciding to spend the money or not. Because otherwise, what really is this debate about? I don't think defaulting is appropriate. And if you're somebody who's a fiscal conservative, which I am, you then are each time left with two decisions. Should I vote no on raising the debt ceiling, which would be default, or should I raise the debt ceiling, which is continuing down the road of spending? To me, those are two unacceptable options. And again, as somebody who's running,
Which
I want to
we've
put,
already authorized.
right, we already authorized it. So I would want to propose the third way and then get someone to explain to me why we are having this debate the way in which it is, because it then just generates things where people attach things that have nothing to do with reducing spending, and it gives people the ability to do things to gain attention, but it does, to me, it doesn't have anything to do with our spending.
would you then be looking towards some reform of the federal budgeting system because there really isn't one? They operate on continuing resolutions and spending cuts, but they're part of the annual budget. It's an ephemeral thing. So what would you like to see the federal government do to rationalize the budgeting system?
Well, I was pleased that we actually had a budget this year because we have not had one in several years. It was just continuing resolutions. And the budgets that were put forth seemed to be more almost academic because people putting them forth knew that they would not be able to gain a majority of votes anyways. And so I think that we do have a budgetary process that is appropriate. It forces the parties to sit down and have the discussions, but the debt ceiling conversation needs to be part of that conversation. It needs to not be us raising the debt ceiling every couple of months, or also having we'll extend it for a month and then do this again in another month and in another month, because what you're talking about is making fundamental choices about what we're going to be doing on spending. And the time to have that conversation is when the people are actually talking about the budget.
One kind of political thing, but I just didn't want to let it get away. You said at the beginning that people, or you're getting an indication that people are scared to give you money to a level that it will be reported because they fear retribution. Can you say anybody who told you that? Are you hearing this a lot, or who is threatening this retribution?
Well, I will certainly not say the names of the potential donors, because then that I'm aware this is on tape, and then then it's the exact same. It takes us down that exact same path. But there are absolutely people who say to me, I cannot give because I have been told I cannot give to your campaign, which to me, first of all, is indication that there's knowledge that there are people who want to give to my campaign, and there's a belief that if people had the free choice to give, that there would be people who actually gave money to the campaign. So there are specific people, and then there are people who will write checks for $199. Now, I cannot tell you their names because for the same reason, and they will not show up on the FEC paperwork.
So it's 200 is the threshold to show
I think
up.
it's, if anything in excess of 200, you requires disclosure of.
So how many 199s did you get?
I'd have to go back and check, but we're not just talking about one $199 check. But to me, it underscores a fundamental problem with the political process, that people in the United States of America feel that they would face retribution for being able to exercise their First Amendment rights to political expression. And I think that a culture in which people feel afraid to be able to vote their conscience, speak their conscience, is something that doesn't help the party, it doesn't help governance. Because ultimately, people should be able to support whomever they want.
Are you blaming the Republican Party for this squeeze on your potential contributors, or who do you blame? Is it Rodney? Is it the party? Is it Rose?
Is it who?
Rosemary Long?
Yeah. What potential donors tell me is there are a variety of people who have told them specifically they cannot donate, and that is at all levels of the political process. But I will not be naming names, and I have tried to the best of my ability to keep the campaign focused on issues. But I think when in media reporting of campaigns, there seems to almost be a myopic focus on, is somebody raising money, and then money is viewed as a proxy for support. And there are certain circumstances where somebody could be reporting an amount that is less than the amount of support they currently have. So I try to keep my race focused on the issues and what I would want to do to help the people of the district. But whenever, in every quarterly reporting, it's here's the amount of money this person raised, here's the amount of money that person raised. And obscured in that is the reasons why people may or may not be giving.
And just to go along this line, I mean, you haven't had support of people like Rosemary Long. I mentioned Sangamon County. You know, we said, we've got an incumbent. Why are you doing this? This is terrible. You haven't been able to get the voter information from the party statewide. You haven't been able to speak at the state fair or at the County Chairman's Association that morning. As a woman in a Republican Party where Reince Priebus says we have to reach out to women, how is your party acting, and how do you feel about it?
Man, Bernie, you had to lay it all out like that.
Well, I didn't want to let you know.
I think that the party is strongest when it encourages competition. If you're a conservative and a Republican, you tout the virtues of the free market. You say that the free market strengthens those who are participating in the market and it yields the best outcomes. I think that those same principles apply in the political process. And ultimately, those who are working to prevent our campaign from being able to have a fair playing field, they will have to think long-term about how it does or does not help the outreach efforts going forward. But I try to stay focused on what I would do for the district, because I entered this race because I felt that I was the strongest person the party could put up in the general election in November, thought I could uniquely represent the district, and I know that to the extent I'm talking about money and political retribution, then I'm not advancing the things that people care about. But I will say that one of the byproducts of the attempt to keep me from speaking, I think has made more people interested in coming out to the town halls and interested in hearing what I have to say. I mean, whenever you say you can't look at this and everyone wants to look at this, and when people are looking to send a message to Washington, D.C. that they're tired of business and politics as usual, I think that people have seen that the fact that I have not been dissuaded shows them that I am the kind of person who would go to Washington, D.C. and not be afraid of speaking truth to power and standing up to the establishment when necessary.
And just the fact that Rodney, has he been on a stage with you since last summer?
I'm trying to think.
Yeah.
We've not had any debates.
Right, and your thoughts about him not agreeing? I mean, it seems like you've offered, 14 and he won't do it, correct?
From what I have been told, he was tentatively considering participating in one radio debate in Bloomington on March 10th. But I don't know whether that will actually happen, but that's the only opportunity I've been told that he's considering. I think it ultimately robs the voters of the ability to make their own assessment. The voters of this district did not ultimately select our party's nominee last time. It was 14 county chairmen. And that's the way it had to happen because of a resignation and the way state law requires it to be. So in no way do I hold him responsible for being appointed by the county chairman. But it shows that we need to have debates because he's not yet debated in front of these primary voters or earned their support. And while there may be people who wish this process wasn't happening, if you believe in democracy and you believe in people having the ability to engage, then I see no reason why we should not have debates.
How has Rodney been for the 13th, in your opinion? Has he done a good job, or has he faltered?
He's had some votes that I would have voted differently, and I think that the district needs somebody who can put forth new ideas as opposed to just vote yes or no. And that's a quality that I would bring to this position if the voters select me. I think that this district, because of the fact that it's one of the few swing districts in the country, and it's going to be a hotly contested race for quite some time, there will be a national exposure on this district for quite some time. And I think it offers the member of Congress who represents it the ability to put forth some ideas that are different, just as opposed to just saying yes or no on the debt ceiling. It's how about we stop the theater of debt ceiling politics and really do something that's substantive.
Where do you stand on immigration reform issues?
I wouldn't support the Senate bill because I think it does not have in place the kind of benchmarks to actually secure the border. And one of the things that I have spent time reviewing and trying to formulate my own position is what the bill looked like in 1986, because in 1986 we were confronted with much the same sort of issue. And not much substantively happened to actually avoid us being exactly where we are. So first and foremost, I would want to secure the border, and I would want to make sure there were enforcement mechanisms in place to be able to address it. I do not think a large comprehensive bill is the appropriate way to go, because it will end up being a bill that a conference committee passes and gives people 72 hours to vote upon, and people will not know what's actually in the bill. And I think we have challenges from an illegal immigration perspective and also a legal immigration perspective. There's a great website, I don't remember the name of it, but it talks about how people can apply to become a citizen of the United States in the first place. And the backlog and the process that people have to go to, I think, inhibits the kind of workers that we need to be able to come. So I would support an enhanced guest worker program. I would support an enhanced high-tech visa program, because other countries have this. It makes us less competitive when we are trying to attract the kind of workers that we need. And I want to make sure that we assess all of the components of our immigration system and not just do something that is political and quick and then not have really solved the problem.
And what about the children that come with their parents and later find out that they're not citizens and they can't go to college? What do we do with them?
I think that for young people who've come here through no fault of their own, I think that looking at some sort of legal status is appropriate, because we're not talking about people who have broken the law, and we're talking about people who are largely contributing to our society, and to not acknowledge that is something that I think would be problematic. And I think that there's probably widespread consensus on that issue, that it's something that could get done, but it's probably something that won't if it's linked to having to have everything in one bill.
And is citizenship included in what you're talking about there? Should it go to citizenship, that legal status?
I think it depends on the way the rest of the reforms look. But in talking to people who find themselves in this situation, citizenship tends not to be the thing that's most important. It's the status. It's the legal status. And looking at that issue, I think, is more important than focusing so much on citizenship, because the things that people are really concerned most about, with deportation and things like that, it is more linked to legal status.
When you talk about securing the border with Mexico, beyond what has already been spent, do you have any idea what the fence costs?
I don't know that a fence would necessarily be the most appropriate way.
Well, that's what the government has spent money on.
Right.
What is your version of securing the border?
I think it would have to be a variety of things. So I don't think that just building a fence is, I mean, people can, there are all sorts of ways people can avoid a fence. And I don't think that it's would be necessarily effective. I think you could have people patrolling. I think other ways of securing the border, but it can't be just throwing money at something for the sake of doing it, because then that's more symbolic. But I don't know what would be the best way of fully securing the border, because I think that's technical, and I don't know that I have the expertise to say what is the most effective way. And so people who in the border states, I think they probably have much greater expertise, and I would defer to their expertise on what would actually be something that's economically feasible.
And in the 13th district, are there jobs which immigrants are employed at because of the nature of the work and the nature of our own workforce?
I know that there are some. The agriculture industry, in many respects, deals with this issue when it comes to seasonal workers, and so I know that there are elements of the Farm Bureau who would like to see a guest worker program because of their real employment needs. It tends not to be something that I hear about, though, in the 13th district as much as in other parts of the country, because I know agriculture is a highly varied industry, and so it's not something that I hear a lot, but it's something that I hear on occasion.
Springfield is in the middle of this high-speed rail project, although some people say it's kind of high-speed because it's not 200. But is it worth federal dollars and continued federal dollars for things like that in this state?
I think that I remain slightly undecided on high-speed rail because I know it's been tried in various parts of the country. And what often happens is that the grant dollars are allocated in a piecemeal fashion, but then there's not it hasn't been thought all the way through, and the projects end up being stopped midway through, and so you don't actually get the high-speed rail, but you've already spent a lot of money. And so that is my biggest fear. I have been following what's been going, the different transportation issues here in Springfield. I know that Springfield got, I think it was maybe a $14 million grant recently.
Yeah, for a bridge, I think.
Yes.
But there's a whole, fixing up the 3rd Street tracks for the eventual
Right.
switch to the 10th Street tracks and closing the 3rd Street tracks. So
Right,
it's
and
going
that
to take 10 years.
and that's an effort that I would support because I spent a great deal of time reading the debate because I know that it was a contentious issue here, and it seems like a lot of studying was done, and people ended up feeling that that was the appropriate place that best addressed the variety of community concerns, and so I would support that. I think it's something that would be good for the area. But in terms of high-speed rail more broadly for the district, it's something I would have to look at. What are the resources that the local community is willing to invest, and are the federal grant dollars just going to be kind of piecemeal grants? Because otherwise you get situations where you have spent a lot of money and don't really have high-speed rail.
That's a bridge to know.
Is our military about the right size, broadly, or have you got an opinion on that one?
I don't have an opinion that it should be reduced. So I think it seems to be about the right size.
Okay. And I know just a little social issue stuff, you are pro-life on abortion. I know that family values are important too. Even your platform as Miss America was abstinence was among them that you were discussing across the country. How do those things fit into your candidacy, and are you looking if you get into Congress, would you change anything? Would you try to restrict abortion? How does this manifest itself?
Well, interestingly, when I decided to announce, I assumed that social issues would dominate the types of things that people talk to me about in the district and at town halls. They hardly ever come up, which I thought was sort of surprising. I am pro-life, so if, as a member of Congress, I would vote for the pro-life legislation that is put up. I think some specific examples. There was a
20-week thing.
Yes.
Pain of the. Would you vote for that?
I would have supported that. I wish the
Rodney
name
voted
is
for
not
that too,
coming
right?
for it. The
Yeah.
name is not coming to.
Yeah, there's something about a feeling of pain bill or something. Yeah, it was about the 20-week thing where there's the theory that the fetus can feel pain, fetal something.
I think we're talking about the
Right,
same
20
bill.
weeks.
And I would have voted for it.
Do you have any
But
exceptions to your pro-life position?
Life of the mother.
And then that, of course, raises the question of rape or incest, and your thoughts on that.
I would not discriminate based on circumstance of conception.
What do you use the word discriminate in a sense of, can you qualify what you mean discriminate in the case of rape?
I would say that the exceptions I would have would be the life of the mother, and so if there were other circumstances of conception, I would not say that the child was not entitled to life because of that.
We are just about to wrap up. I have more to ask on the issue of guns and gun violence in the country. How do we get a handle on gun violence in the United States?
I think it depends on the type of gun violence, and when I hear debate about gun violence as an issue, it seems to me to not take into consideration the types of gun violence that exist within our country. So when I was Miss America, part of my platform dealt with violence prevention. Obviously, violence dealing with weapons is something that came into play. And looking at the reason why a young person would choose to engage in that way is important. And so I support fully the Second Amendment. I do not think that additional regulations would be the appropriate way of addressing it. But when you're talking about gun violence, you're talking about school violence, you're talking about gang violence, you're talking about guns being used in the commission of certain crimes. And so when you're
Talking
talking,
about people using a gun in the theater to
Correct.
shoot somebody.
you're talking about all of those
71-year-old
things.
ex-police officer gets out of control, and you don't think those things ought to be controlled.
Well, if you're talking about somebody who gets out of control, to me the issue would be that individual as opposed to whether they had a weapon.
People
And
use all kinds of weapons. Which weapons would you say are okay and not? They use shotguns, they use automatic rifles, they use pistols, they use every manner of weapon short of a bazooka. So what would you do to
Are you
control? How do you make a distinction, I guess, is the question, around the type of weapon that's used versus any other weapon, the gun?
I may not be understanding, so stop me if I'm not.
You said that it depends on the kind of gun that's used.
Oh, no, okay, that's not what I meant to say then. I appreciate, that's not what I meant to say. What I meant to say is when we're talking about the type of, what do we do to address gun violence? What I meant is we have to look at the type of violence we are talking about. So we have school violence, we have the circumstances you brought up, we have violence that's associated with gangs. So I did not mean to say the type of gun. So I appreciate the clarification.
So you're not for limiting magazines or any what about background checks at gun shows and stuff like that? You know, because there was, I guess, 80 or 90% of people thought that after Sandy Hook, but then Congress didn't vote for it. Do you think that such background checks are not necessary for all gun purchases?
Well, in the state of Illinois, when people have to get their FOID card, it seems to me that they are putting forth information that enables an evaluation of a whole host of factors. And so I don't see how adding additional checks address some of the actual violence issues.
I was recently in Mexico for a month, and I think there were at least 4 or 5 shootings while I was down there.
Really?
You know, and people were asking me, what's wrong with the United States? Because in Mexico, people can't carry them.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe criminals do, but, and the police do, but your average citizen doesn't have a gun. And people wonder, what's wrong with us? And do you ever reflect on that and think, if you have a series of kids that bring guns to a university or a grammar school or a middle school or high school, should we consider this just normal?
I definitely think about the young person who carries the gun to school. And one of the events that I participated in when I was Miss America was involving the family of someone who was a victim at Columbine. And this was an issue I thought a lot about, especially during that experience, because you did have young people who chose to bring weapons to school and exacted incredible harm to their classmates. But from all of the research that I have seen and experienced with young people, trying to get to the root of why they felt that was their outlet in the first place would be more meaningful in terms of reducing violence than additional legislation. And so I fully share the concern about the fact that there are young people who would do that, because it's devastating. And I've talked to parents who have had children in those circumstances, but having additional gun control legislation doesn't get to the issue of why that person chose to do it in the first place. And so my perspective is wanting to focus more on those root causes. And I understand that that's an issue that good people are going to disagree, because I think both sides bring to it a genuine concern about what do we do to prevent loss of life. And so it's a conversation that I know that would happen over and over and over again. And I bring to it my perspective from working with young people, but I know others have different perspectives, and it's a highly emotional issue.
Well, it's a highly deadly issue,
Mhm.
unfortunately.
I agree.
And so you're young and you're raised post '84 when the Supreme Court decided that the Second Amendment applied to individuals. And a lot of us grew up in another time when the thought of of a kid killing somebody in school would have been so out of the mainstream that you would never even have thought of it. And now it's so common that we just go, oh, gee, another school killing. It's just something to reflect on.
I definitely do, because I still go into schools, and not as a candidate, but just as a citizen, and talk to young people about ways of reducing violence. And so it's definitely something that I reflect upon, because anytime you can do something to prevent loss of life, we should. And then it's trying to figure out what is that, and what are those things that also respect constitutional rights. But I definitely reflect upon it.
And kind of a larger, and I know we're pushing this time, just, I can't help but separate these things in my mind and wonder how you think about this. So, there seems to me to be very little public reaction to all the NSA stuff, you know, where there's clearly an amendment to the Constitution that, okay, we've got FISA and all this other yada yada, but it seems like even in the best of worlds, they've gone beyond what the guy on the street thought. And maybe, is that just too complicated for people? Relative to the Second Amendment, it says you can bear an arm, so, damn, I know what a gun looks like, so I want that, you know, and they just don't quite get the other piece.
Well, you
Any
raised
thoughts about that?
Yes. I've thought a lot about that, because the lack of public outrage to the NSA overreaching is something that I think is troubling. And the number of people who say, well, if you don't have anything to hide and you haven't done anything suspicious, then what should you care about the government engaging in surveillance activities? But to me, then that's exactly the circumstances under which the government does not have the right to engage in surveillance activities.
Yeah, talk about limited government.
Right. And if the violation is the surveillance, it's not what they choose to do with it after the fact. So I know that part of the administration response was, well, we won't look at it until there's probable cause. No. The Fourth Amendment says that before the surveillance begins, there has to be that sort of suspicion. And so I did find it troubling that people seem very willing to allow the erosion of that, because the upholding of those rights, I think, is supremely important. And although it's a technical issue, you're talking about something that's fundamental, and something that was fundamental to our founders. And during the course of my candidacy, I talk a lot about the Constitution. I talk a lot about the powers afforded to the federal government, the rights that are afforded to individuals, because I think if we don't continue to premise our arguments based on those components of the Constitution, then we start to lose why those things matter in the first place.
So do you think that organizations should be treated as individuals?
Should organizations be treated as individuals?
Corporations.
I think that it depends on the context. So a corporation's right to speech, for example, is different than an individual. And the implications of that will vary based on the context. So, for example, individuals, when they engage in or corporations, if they're engaging in commercial speech, that's afforded less constitutional protection than an individual engaging in political speech.